Clara Whitmore slammed the deed to her ranch down on the bank manager's desk so hard the inkwell rattled. "I am not selling." The man behind the desk, fat fingers, soft hands, never worked a day outside in his life, leaned back and smiled the way men smile when they think they've already won. "Miss Whitmore, you have 30 days before this bank takes everything your father built." She didn't flinch, didn't blink. "Then I have 30 days to make you regret saying that." So, if this story moves you, subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first thing you need to understand about Red Hollow, Montana, in the year 1882 is this. The town had rules, not the kind of rules written in a courthouse or carved into a church wall. The kind of rules that live in people's mouths, passed from one neighbor to the next, like a slow sickness, until everyone believes them so completely, they forget anyone ever had to make them up in the first place. And the first rule of Red Hollow was simple. Women did not run ranches. Women did not carry rifles. Women did not refuse marriage proposals from respectable men. Women did not argue with merchants, negotiate with bankers, or look a cattle baron directly in the eye and tell him where he could put his offer. Clara Whitmore broke every single one of those rules before she turned 26 years old, and Red Hollow had never forgiven her for it. She had grown up on that ranch. Grown up watching her father, James Whitmore, work the land with his hands until those hands cracked and bled and still kept working. He was not a wealthy man. He was not a connected man. But he was a believing man, and what he believed in more than the land or the horses or the Montana sky that seemed to go on forever was his daughter. Clara, he used to tell her when she was small enough to ride on his shoulders. "You've got more sense in your little finger than half this town put together. Don't you ever let anybody tell you different." She never forgot that. Not when the school teacher told her girls didn't need to learn mathematics. Not when the town pastor suggested she was too spirited for a godly man. Not when her father got sick and the ranch started hemorrhaging money and every man in Red Hollow lined up at her door, not to offer genuine help, but to offer rescue in exchange for everything she was. James Whitmore died on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Clara buried him herself. She hired 2 ranch hands, paid them fair wages, and went right back to work. That was 14 months ago. And in those 14 months, she had lost half her workers, fought off 2 attempts by Edwin Caldwell to buy her out, nursed a herd of horses through a brutal winter illness, and rebuilt 3 sections of fencing with her own 2 hands. She had also not slept a full night in longer than she could remember. But she was still standing, which in Red Hollow was apparently the most unforgivable thing a woman could do. The morning everything changed started like most mornings in Clara's life. Badly. She was at Harrison's General Store, the largest merchant operation in town, the one place you couldn't avoid if you needed supplies, trying to place an order for grain and medical supplies for the horses. Tom Harrison stood behind his counter with his arms crossed, looking at Clara the way you look at something that's taking up space you need for something better. "I told you last month, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying the particular kind of patience men use when they want to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. "I can't extend more credit to the Whitmore Ranch." "I'm not asking for credit," Clara said. "I'm asking you to take my order. I'll pay when I sell at the spring market." Spring market. He said it like she'd told him she planned to fly there on a cloud. "And if the market's slow, if your horses don't sell what you're expecting, they will." "You don't know that." "I know my horses." "With respect, Miss Whitmore." "You're about to say something that has nothing to do with respect," Clara said flatly. "So just say it." Harrison's jaw tightened. Around them, a few other customers had gone quiet. That particular quality of quiet that means everyone is listening and no one intends to admit it. "You need a man managing that ranch," he said. "You need someone who understands business, who the banks will actually listen to, who can..." "Who can what?" Clara's voice was steady. That was always the thing that unsettled people most about her. She didn't cry. She didn't shrink. She got very, very still. "Who can stand in a store and tell a woman her horses aren't worth buying from? Is that what a man can do better than me?" "That's not what I meant." Place my order, Mr. Harrison. Or don't, and I'll ride to Billings and spend my money there. Your choice. The silence stretched. Harrison looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved. From the back of the store, a low voice broke the moment. I'll vouch for the order. Everyone turned. He was standing near the doorway, had probably been there for a minute or two long enough to hear most of the exchange, though nobody had noticed him come in. He was tall, lean in the way that comes from real work, rather than vanity. With dark hair pushed back under a worn hat, and eyes the color of weathered wood, brown edging toward something harder. He wasn't flashy. His clothes were trail-dusty and practical. He had the look of a man who had spent significant portions of his life outdoors and had stopped caring what that looked like to people who hadn't. He stepped forward slowly, not like he was trying to take over the room, more like he was simply choosing to be in a different part of it. Wyatt Blackthorne, he said to Harrison, extending a hand. Rode in from Wyoming this morning, looking for work. Harrison shook the hand automatically. The way you shake a stranger's hand before you've decided what to make of them. And you're vouching for the Whitmore order because, Harrison started. Because I intend to work for Miss Whitmore, Wyatt said simply. Which means her operation is my operation, and I don't have a credit problem with you. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and set some bills on the counter. That should cover the order. She'll pay the rest at market. Clara stared at him. She had not asked for that. She had not asked for any of that. And the part of her that had been fighting alone for 14 months, the part that had learned through very hard experience that accepting help was the first step to losing control, coiled tight in her chest, like a spring winding too fast. I don't need, she started. I know you don't, Wyatt said, turning to look at her directly. His voice was quiet, not aggressive, not condescending, just direct. Like he was saying something obvious and didn't understand why it needed to be complicated. But the order's placed, and I still need work, so we can argue about who owed who what after you tell me if you're hiring. Clara studied him for a long moment. She had gotten very good at reading men. 14 months of fighting them had made her an expert. She could tell within 60 seconds whether a man was going to be useful or useless, honest or angling worth her time or a waste of it. This one was harder to read than most. I wasn't looking at her the way men usually looked at her, either with irritation or with the particular brand of fascination that meant he thought her stubbornness was attractive in a temporary, tameable sort of way. He was just looking at her. The same way he'd looked at Harrison. Straight on. Like she was a person he was in a conversation with. It threw her off balance. She didn't like being thrown off balance. What kind of work can you do? She asked. Horses, fencing, construction when needed. I've wrangled, I've herded, I've tracked. I know medicine for livestock, not the fancy kind, the kind that works. I can navigate rough terrain, and I don't panic in bad weather. Why'd you leave Wyoming? Something shifted behind his eyes, quick like a shadow moving underwater. Then it was gone. Work dried up. Clara filed that answer away. It was technically an answer. It also wasn't quite the full truth. She let it sit for now. I pay fair wages, she said. Not generous ones because I don't have generous money. I give orders and I expect them followed same as any other employer. I don't cook for my workers, and I don't manage your social life. You work the hours I need, and you do the job right. Sounds fine. The last 3 men I hired quit within a month because they couldn't stand taking orders from a woman. Then they were idiots, Wyatt said without particular heat, like he was stating something that simply didn't require emphasis. Another pause. You want to see the ranch first? Clara asked. No. No. If I need to see the ranch to decide whether I want the job, that means I'm evaluating the condition rather than the work. I already know what the work is. He looked at her steadily. The question is whether you want to hire me. Clara Whitmore had hired and fired more men in 14 months than most ranch owners did in a decade. Not one of them had ever turned the question around on her like that. She almost said no out of pure reflex. Instead, she heard herself say, "Be at the Whitmore Ranch by 6 tomorrow morning. Don't be late." Outside the store in the mid-morning sun, her neighbor Margaret Pruitt fell into step beside her. Margaret was 63 years old, had buried 2 husbands, and had spent the last decade perfecting the art of saying cruel things in a kind tone of voice. "Who was that man?" Margaret asked, her eyes cutting sideways toward the store entrance. "New hire," Clara said, not slowing down. Margaret made the sound of a woman preparing to deliver bad news gently. "Clara, honey, hiring a strange man, you know nothing about taking his money in public like that. People are going to talk. People always talk. They're going to say you're desperate, reckless, improper." Clara stopped walking and looked at Margaret directly. "They've been saying all of those things since the day my father died. What exactly am I supposed to do differently?" Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. "That's what I thought," Clara said, and kept walking. That evening, alone in the ranch house, Clara sat at her father's desk with the account ledger open in front of her. The numbers had not improved since the last time she'd looked at them. They never did lately. She ran her finger down the columns. Debt here, expense there, the quarterly payment to the bank, looming like a thunderhead, and did the math she'd been doing every night for months, hoping somehow it would come out differently. It didn't. $3,200. That was what she needed by the end of summer to stay out of foreclosure. That was what Edwin Caldwell knew perfectly well she didn't have, which was why he kept sending his people around with offers that were really just different shapes of the same thing: surrender. She closed the ledger. She thought about the man from Wyoming. The calm way he'd laid money on Harrison's counter like it was nothing. The way he'd looked at her, direct, unreadable, not unkind. "Don't trust it," said the part of her that had learned trust was a door that led mostly to disappointment. But watch, said another part, quieter, older. Watch and see. She pressed her palms flat against the desk. Her father's desk, worn smooth at the edges, by years of his hands doing exactly what her hands were doing now, and made herself breathe. "You were right to believe in me, Papa," she said quietly, to the empty room, to the desk, to whatever was left of him in the walls and the wood and the land outside the window. "I'm not done yet." Wyatt Blackthorne arrived at 5:47 in the morning. Clara was already in the barn. She heard the crunch of boots on gravel and came out to find him standing at the fence line, looking at the horses in the pre-dawn gray. He had his hat off, turning it in his hands, a habit she would come to learn that meant he was thinking seriously about something. "You're early," she said. "You said 6. "It's not 6. I know." He put his hat back on. "I wanted to see the horses before the day started." Clara looked at him, then at the horses. "What do you see?" she asked before she could stop herself. He was quiet for a moment. "I see horses that have been worked hard and cared for carefully," he said. "I see a herd that's been through something rough: winter sickness, maybe from the way that Rowan is still holding her weight off her right foreleg. I see a fence that needs 3 new posts on the east side before the next storm, or you'll lose the north pasture containment." He paused. "And I see someone who's been doing this alone for too long." Clara's jaw tightened. "I'm not looking for sympathy." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not offering it. I'm offering an extra pair of hands." The first week was a war, not a violent one, nothing dramatic, just the constant grinding friction of 2 stubborn people trying to figure out where the other one ended, and the argument began. Clara gave orders. Wyatt followed them mostly. But he also had opinions, and he had the maddening tendency to state them quietly at exactly the moment when she was most certain she was right. "We're moving the mares to the south pasture today," she told him on Wednesday morning. "The ground's soft from the rain," he said. "Another day the grass will be better for them anyway." "I know the ground." "I know you do. I'm saying the timing could be better. I'm saying we're moving them today." He looked at her, didn't argue further, helped her move them. By Thursday, 2 of the younger mares had pulled up slightly lame from the soft ground, and Clara spent 2 hours that evening working their legs and trying not to think about whether she should have listened. She didn't apologize. He didn't say "I told you so," which she decided was either very respectful or very strategic. She hadn't figured out which yet. On Friday, everything got complicated. She came out of the house at dawn to find Wyatt at the water trough with Pete Dawson, one of her two remaining ranch hands, and Pete's face had the look of a man who had been caught mid-sentence in a conversation he wasn't proud of. "Something I should know about," Clara said. Pete straightened. He was 23, decent enough worker, but with the particular weakness of caring very much what the other men in town thought of him. "Just talking," Pete said. "About what?" Pete glanced at Wyatt. Wyatt's expression was unreadable. "Some of the boys in town are saying—" Pete started, then stopped. "Go ahead." Clara said, her voice flat and patient. "They're saying it ain't right. A woman giving orders to men. They're saying Caldwell's offer is better than waiting for this place to fold, and that any man who works here is just making himself look—" He stopped again. "Weak," Clara supplied. Pete said nothing. "So you're thinking about quitting?" "I'm thinking about my reputation." "Pete." Her voice was quiet. Quiet in the way it got when she was working hard to keep something contained. "You have been paid on time every week since you started here. You have been treated fairly. You have been given work that is real and wages that are honest." She paused. "But if you need the approval of men who have never built anything with their own hands to feel good about your work, then you're right. This probably isn't the job for you." Pete looked at the ground, looked at Wyatt. Wyatt was watching Clara. Not like he was assessing her exactly. More like someone watching something remarkable happen and trying to figure out how to hold the image. "I'll stay," Pete said finally quietly. "Sorry, Miss Whitmore." Clara nodded once, turned and walked to the barn. She waited until she was inside with the familiar smell of hay and horses and oil on leather before she let herself breathe all the way out. Behind her from outside, she heard Pete's voice. "She always liked that." And Wyatt's answer, "Yeah. And before you say anything else stupid, that's a compliment." The twist came on a Thursday, exactly 11 days after Wyatt Blackthorne arrived in Red Hollow. And it came from the mouth of Edwin Caldwell himself. Clara was in town at the bank, making her monthly payment, smaller than it should have been, exactly the amount she'd scraped together when she heard raised voices from the back office. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The walls in that bank were simply thin, and the voices were simply loud. "Whitmore Ranch account." Caldwell's voice smooth and unhurried. "I want the full note called. Mr. Caldwell, we can't simply—" "You can do what your investors tell you to do. And I am your largest investor." A pause. "Call the note. Give her 30 days. She won't have it. And if she does—" a low sound, almost a laugh. "She won't." Clara stood at the teller window, with her hand flat on the counter, not moving. The teller was looking at her with the expression of someone who wished they were somewhere else. "Miss Whitmore," the teller said carefully. "Are you all right?" Clara picked up her receipt, folded it, put it in her coat pocket. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." She walked out of this bank and into the main street and stood there for a moment in the sun with the weight of what she'd just heard pressing down on her like a physical thing. 30 days. 30 days to raise thousands of dollars. She could sell the ranch and barely break even. She could take Caldwell's insulting offer and lose the land her parents had bled for. Or she could do something that everyone would call impossible reckless, and the act of a woman who had clearly lost her mind. She was already walking back toward the livery where she'd left her horse when she made her decision. The plan that formed in her mind was dangerous. It was uncertain. It was also the only one she had. And as she rode back toward the ranch, back toward the broken fences and the recovering horses, and the one man in Red Hollow, who had looked at her without deciding in advance what he was going to see, Clara Whitmore thought for the first time in a very long time that she might not be entirely alone. She didn't know what to do with that feeling, but she filed it away, right next to the plan, and she kept writing. That evening, Wyatt found her at the desk with the ledger open and a map of Montana spread across it. He looked at the map, looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. She told him. All of it. The voices through the wall. Caldwell's instructions. The 30 days. the number she needed to raise, and the distance between that number and anything she currently had. She told him about the auction, a legendary horse sale held every year in a town 200 miles north where trained horses could command prices that seemed almost impossible by Red Hollow standards. She told him she had 3 horses ready to sell if she could get them there. She told him what she thought they might fetch. When she finished, the room was quiet. Wyatt looked at the map for a long time. 200 miles, he said. Mostly mountain terrain. In how many days? We'd need to leave in 4. Another silence. You were going to tell me this when, he asked. I'm telling you now. Clara. Something in his voice was different. Not softer exactly, just more direct, like he'd decided something. This isn't a job for one person. I know that. So you're asking for help? She looked at him. He looked back. I'm telling you the situation, she said carefully. What you do with that information is your choice. He almost smiled. Almost. Right, he said. Well, my choice is I'm going. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say she didn't need him, didn't need anyone, had been managing on her own since the day she picked up a shovel at her father's grave and went back to work. She wanted to say all of that. What came out instead was, don't be late. And Wyatt Blackthorne nodded once the same way she did when she meant something she wasn't going to take back. Wouldn't dream of it. Outside, the Montana night settled over Red Hollow like a held breath. In 11 days, a stranger from Wyoming had placed money on a merchant's counter, held the fence line through a frozen morning, watched her hold her ground when a younger man needed reminding what honor looked like, and not once had he looked at her like she was something that needed to be fixed. Clara Whitmore sat alone at her father's desk and pressed her hand flat on the worn wood. She had a plan. She had 30 days. And for the first time since James Whitmore had drawn his last breath, she was not entirely sure she would have to face what came next alone. That terrified her, almost as much as it steadied her. The morning they were supposed to leave, it rained, not a gentle rain. Not the kind that softened ground and filled troughs and made ranchers feel like the land was on their side. This was the Montana kind, sideways, angry with a wind behind it that found every gap in your coat and made its home there. Clara was in the barn at 4 in the morning, loading equipment onto the supply wagon, and when Pete appeared in the doorway with his collar up and his hat pulled low, she already knew what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. Miss Whitmore. He stopped, started again. My ma's sick. Clara didn't stop moving. She lifted a coil of rope and set it in the wagon bed. Is she? Real sick. I can't leave her with nobody to look after. Pete. She turned to look at him. The lantern light caught the side of his face, and she could see he wasn't lying exactly. But she could also see the relief under the guilt. The relief of a man who had found a door out of something that frightened him. You don't have to explain yourself. Go home. He blinked. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I truly am. I know you are. She picked up another rope. Close the barn door on your way out. He stood there another second like he wanted her to be angrier. Like anger would have been easier than this. Then he left. The barn door shut behind him. Clara stood in the quiet with the rain hammering the roof overhead, and the 3 horses shifting in their stalls, and the supply wagon half-loaded in front of her, and she did the math. 200 miles, 3 horses to transport and keep healthy on the road. 1 wagon. Herself. She'd done harder things with worse numbers. She picked up the next crate and kept loading. That was when she heard the second set of boots. Wyatt came in from the back entrance, already dressed for travel with his saddlebags over one shoulder and his hat shedding water in a steady stream off the brim. He looked at the wagon, looked at Clara. Where's Pete? He asked. Gone. His mother. That's what he said. Wyatt set his saddlebags down against the wall and started loading from the other side of the wagon without being asked, without pausing, without making a single comment about Pete or the rain or the math of what they were now trying to do with 1 fewer person. Clara watched him for a moment. You know what this looks like now, she said. 2 people. That terrain. If something goes wrong, then something goes wrong and we handle it. He hefted a feed sack into the wagon. Same as everything else. This isn't the same as everything else. This is 200 miles of mountain country with 3 horses worth more than this ranch right now. I know what it is. Wyatt? He stopped, set down what he was carrying, and turned to look at her with that direct, uncluttered attention she still hadn't entirely gotten used to. Are you trying to talk me out of coming? He asked. Or are you trying to give me permission to leave without feeling bad about it? The question landed somewhere between her ribs. Neither, she said. I'm trying to be honest about the risk. I appreciate that. He picked the feed sack back up. Now let me be honest about something. I've been through worse terrain with worse odds for people I cared about a lot less. So unless you have an actual reason you don't want me on this trip, I'm going. Clara held his gaze for another second. Then she picked up a crate and kept moving. You'd better not slow me down, she said. Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. Wouldn't dream of it. They had the wagon loaded and were on the road before 5. The rain followed them for the first 6 hours. By midday, the rain had stopped, but the trail had turned to something between mud and determination, and the horses were working hard just to keep forward momentum. Clara rode beside the wagon, checking the herd, constantly reading their gait, the way she read everything carefully, looking for what wasn't being said out loud. The roan mare Duchess was the one she worried about most. Still not back to full strength from the winter illness. Still carrying herself slightly cautiously on uneven ground. Clara had debated leaving her behind, but Duchess was also the horse most likely to command the highest price at auction if she arrived in good condition. Wyatt drove the wagon, and she noticed he'd picked up the rhythm of the trail, quickly knew when to hold the team back before a soft patch, when to give them room on a slope. He didn't ask her for guidance, but he also wasn't prideful about it. When she called out a course correction, he made it without comment. They didn't talk much those first hours. Not because there was nothing to say, but because both of them were the kind of people who understood that some stretches of work required all of your attention, and conversation was something you saved for when the work allowed it. Around the 3rd hour, though, the terrain leveled out briefly, and the horses settled into a steady pace, and the silence shifted from necessary to something else. You ever been to the Billings auction? Wyatt asked. Once, with my father. I was 16. Clara kept her eyes on the trail ahead. He wanted me to see how the market worked, what buyers looked for, how you read a room full of men deciding how much something was worth. What did you learn? She thought about it. That most of them decide before the horse even comes in. They look at who's selling. They look at who else is bidding. They're buying reputation as much as they're buying the animal. She paused. Which means I'll be fighting that before I say a single word. Or, Wyatt said, they'll be surprised. And surprise is its own kind of advantage. She looked at him sideways. When did you get optimistic? I'm not optimistic. I'm strategic. There's a difference. Optimism hopes things will go well, he said. Strategy makes plans for when they don't. Clara was quiet for a moment. What's your plan for when they don't? She asked. He glanced at her. Something in his expression was careful measuring. Let me worry about that, he said. You worry about the horses. It should have annoyed her. That kind of answer from any other man would have felt like dismissal. But somehow from him, it felt like the opposite. Like he was taking something off her plate because he'd noticed the plate was already full. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she always did with things she didn't know what to do with. She filed it away and kept moving. They made camp at dusk on the first day, 17 miles into the journey. Not ideal time, not ideal pace. But the horses needed rest, and Clara knew better than to push animals when they were telling you something. Duchess had started favoring her leg again in the last 2 hours, and Clara spent the better part of an hour after they stopped working on it, her hands moving with the automatic confidence of someone who had learned this, not from books, but from years of watching and doing, and getting it wrong enough times to start getting it right. Wyatt built a fire and found food from the supply wagon, and didn't once suggest she step back and let him take over with the horse. That she thought was worth noting. Most men had a threshold with her, an amount of capability they could watch her demonstrate before something in them needed to reassert itself, needed to offer, needed to step in, needed to remind her subtly or directly that they were still there, and still useful, and still technically in possession of opinions. Wyatt seemed genuinely, almost bafflingly untroubled by watching her be good at things. She was still thinking about that when she came to sit by the fire, and he handed her a plate of food without preamble, and she took it without thanking him, because thanking him felt somehow like making too much of something he'd meant as simple. They ate in quiet for a while. "Tell me something," Clara said eventually. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway. "What do you want to know?" "Wyoming. You said work dried up, but that's not the whole answer, and we both know it." The fire moved between them. Wyatt's eyes were on it. "No," he said. "It's not." Silence. "You don't have to tell me," Clara said. Not as permission, more as an acknowledgement that she understood the kind of story that didn't come out easily. "I had a family," Wyatt said and stopped. She waited. "A wife. A son. He was 3 years old." His voice was the same in tone, quiet, even, but something underneath it had changed, like the difference between still water and frozen water. Both looked calm. Only one was. "Fever came through the county in the winter of '79. I was away on a drive. By the time I got back—" He stopped. Didn't finish. He didn't need to. Clara felt the weight of it settle between them. Not as a thing to respond to, there was nothing to respond to, but as a thing to simply hold space for. "I'm sorry," she said. It was inadequate, she knew it. But inadequate was all that existed for things like that, and she had learned not to reach for words that were bigger than the truth allowed. "After that I moved," Wyatt said. "A lot. Different ranches, different territories. Got very good at not staying long enough to—" He stopped again. Reached forward to tend the fire. "Long enough for it to matter, I suppose." "But it always matters," Clara said quietly. He looked up at her. "Yeah," he said. "It does." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, one of the horses shifted and blew out a breath and settled again. "My father believed in me when nobody else did," Clara said. She wasn't sure why she was saying it. Maybe because he'd offered something real, and it felt wrong to offer nothing back. "He died, and I thought the belief would go with him. That I'd be holding this ranch up with no foundation under me." She looked at her hands. Rough. Capable. Her father's hands in miniature. "But I think maybe he gave me enough of it before he left. Enough to last." Wyatt watched her. "He sounds like someone worth proving right," he said. Clara looked up. "Yeah," she said. "He was." They sat with that for a while. Not uncomfortably. Just sitting with it the way you sit with something that's bigger than conversation and doesn't require filling up. It was the first time in 14 months that Clara Whitmore sat near another person in the evening and felt something other than the urge to get back to work. She didn't examine it too closely, but she felt it. The second day was harder. The terrain climbed and the wagon labored and the temperature dropped enough that their breath was visible by mid-morning. One of the geldings, a big bay named Grant, started favoring his left foreleg around the 4th hour, and Clara dismounted and examined him on the trail with the cold pressing down on her fingers and her heart doing the calculation that ranch people do automatically. How much? How fast? How serious? What does this cost? It wasn't the tendon. A stone bruise, she thought. Manageable if they slowed their pace. "We're going to be short on time," Wyatt said, watching her work. "I know. You want to push through tonight?" She looked at the sky, the light, the horses. Grant standing three-legged in the cold, with the patience of an animal that trusted the hands currently working on him. "No," she said. "We rest early and start before dawn." "That'll make day 3 brutal." Day 3 was always going to be brutal. She stood. "Help me check the others." They went through all 3 horses, slowly, carefully. Her hands in his, she was surprised how quickly she had learned to read his competency. The way he handled an animal. Clean, confident, no wasted motion, no impatience. He'd done this before. Not once or twice. He'd done this the way you do something when it's been part of your life long enough to become instinct. "You're good with them," she said. "I had a good teacher once." A pause. Different kind of ranch. Different territory. Long time ago, she didn't push it. He'd tell her when he was ready, or he wouldn't. Both were his right. The second night, the trouble came from outside. They heard them before they saw them, the sound of horses moving too deliberately for wildlife, too quiet for travelers with nothing to hide. Clara was up and moving before the sound fully registered hand, already going for the rifle she kept within reach. Wyatt was right behind her. No panic. No frozen second of, what do we do? Just up and moving, same rhythm, like they'd been responding to trouble together for years. Two men appeared at the edge of the firelight. They were the kind of men who wore their intentions on their faces and didn't bother trying to hide them. Youngish, trail-worn, with the specific relaxed danger of people who had done this before. "Evening," said the one on the left. His eyes were moving over the horses, counting, calculating. "Evening," Clara said. She was holding the rifle at her side. Not raised, but not hidden either. "That's a fine set of horses you're carrying," he said. "Awful lot for two people managing alone." "We're managing fine." "Don't look fine." He smiled. The smile didn't reach anything behind his eyes. "Looks like you could use some help. Maybe trade some of that fine horse flesh for safe passage." "We're not trading anything," Clara said. The man looked at her. Really looked at her, the particular assessment of someone deciding whether the obstacle in front of them is serious. Then he looked at Wyatt. And Wyatt was looking back at him with an expression that was entirely empty of anything except attention. No fear, no aggression, just attention. The kind that said very clearly that the man behind these eyes had been in situations exactly like this one before, and had not always been the one who lost. The second man, who hadn't spoken, shifted his weight. "There are just two of them," he muttered to his partner. "I can hear you," Wyatt said pleasantly. Another pause. The first man looked at the rifle in Clara's hands, looked at Wyatt's stance, did some calculation of his own. "Passing through," he said finally, with the tone of a man reclassifying the situation. "No trouble." "Good choice," Clara said. They left. The sound of their horses faded. The fire crackled. Clara stood with her rifle for another 2 minutes, listening, making absolutely sure. Then she let her breath out. "You knew they'd leave," she said. "I thought there was a good chance," Wyatt said. "Men like that are looking for easy. We weren't easy." "And if they hadn't left," he looked at her, "then we'd have handled it," he said simply. "Like everything else." She shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, in something closer to acknowledgement. "You're the most aggravating person I've ever met," she said. "Nothing rattles you." "Things rattle me," he said. "I just don't find it useful to show it while the thing that's rattling me is still in front of me." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Is that something you learned?" she asked. "Or something that happened to you?" He was quiet. "Both probably," he said. She nodded, lowered the rifle, sat back down near the fire. After a moment, he sat down across from her. They didn't sleep, both too alert, both listening too carefully, but they sat through the rest of the night in the fire's light, and somehow the silence between them had changed again. Grown something in it. Some quality of two people who had been through a thing together, and were starting to understand what that meant. Day 3 broke hard and cold and fast. They were moving before the sun was fully up, and Clara set a pace she knew was demanding and held it anyway. Every mile mattered now. Every hour. Grant's stone bruise seemed slightly better with rest, and Duchess was moving well, and she let herself feel cautious about that. Not optimistic, because optimism was something you paid for later, but cautious. Aware. It was around midday on a high stretch of trail, where the wind came at them from 3 directions simultaneously, that Wyatt said something that stopped her. "Can I ask you something? You've been talking to me for 3 days. Why ask permission now? Because this is different. He glanced at her sideways from the wagon seat. The town. The way they treat you. The way you carry it. You're not trying to prove women are better than men, are you? It wasn't quite a question. Clara looked straight ahead. No, she said. So what are you trying to prove? She was quiet for longer than she meant to be. That he was right, she said finally. My father. He looked at me when I was 5 years old and said, you see the way you see. Don't let anyone take that from you. She paused. Every time I hold that ranch, every time I don't quit, every time I look Caldwell in the face and tell him, no, that's me saying to my father's memory, you were right. You saw something real. Wyatt didn't say anything for a moment. Then, he was. She glanced at him. I was right, Wyatt said. Whatever else happens, he was right about you. Clara looked away. The wind pushed at her from the side, cold and relentless and real. She didn't trust herself to speak for a few seconds. You don't know me well enough to say that, she said finally. I've watched you work for 2 weeks, he said. I've watched you load a wagon in the rain after a man quit on you and not say one word of self-pity. I've watched you work a horse's leg by firelight with the same focus you'd give it in a warm barn. I've watched you stand down 2 men last night without flinching. He was quiet for a moment. I know enough. The trail curved. She kept her eyes on it. Don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't make me... She stopped, started again. I have to keep my head clear on this trip. I have to think about distance and timing and horse health and auction strategy, and I cannot... She stopped again. He was watching her. You cannot what? He said. His voice was quiet, steady. I cannot be someone you believe in right now, she said. I can only be someone who gets these horses there. A long silence. All right, he said. She exhaled. But Clara, he said. She looked at him. Those aren't different things. They reached the mountain passage on the afternoon of day 3, and it was exactly as brutal as the map suggested, and then some. The trail narrowed to something that barely deserved the name, with rock face on one side and a drop on the other, and the wind had decided to make itself a participant in the journey by turning unpredictable and mean. The horses didn't like it. Grant stopped 3 times. Duchess went sideways once, and Clara was off her own horse and at the mare's head before the animal could work herself into real panic, talking low and steady and sure until the mare's breathing slowed and her feet found the ground again. Wyatt managed the wagon with a concentration that was almost surgical. Every decision exact, no margin for error, hands and voice and body, all working together with the team. They were 3/4 through the passage when it happened. A sound, sharp and explosive. A rock giving way somewhere above them. Then another. Grant bolted. Clara wheeled her horse and went after him before the thought was fully formed. Pure reflex, pure muscle memory. The part of her that was more horsewoman than human going into operation. She caught Grant's lead line 50 feet down the trail, brought him around, talked him down from the edge of panic with a focused, furious tenderness that left no room for her own fear. Behind her, she could hear Wyatt managing the team on the wagon. One of them had spooked too, his voice carrying over the wind, low and even and unbroken. When she got back to the passage with Grant, Wyatt had the wagon stopped and both wagon horses steadied. He looked at her, looked at Grant, looked at her again. You all right? He said. She checked her hands. They were steady. Fine, she said. He nodded. Something moved across his face for just a second. She didn't have a name for it, not quite. Relief, maybe. And something else. Something that wasn't just a man checking on a colleague. She didn't name it, but she felt it. They came down out of the mountains on the evening of day 4, with the auction town visible in the distance, and the horses tired but intact, and Clara's whole body running on the particular fuel you find when you've been operating past your reserves long enough that you've forgotten what normal feels like. They made camp at the edge of town. Tomorrow was the auction. Clara sat with the ledger in her lap, not the ranch ledger, The auction records she'd pulled together before leaving the prices from previous years, the profiles of likely buyers, the notes she'd made about each horse and what story they told to the right person. Wyatt came and sat beside her. Not across from her. Beside. It was the first time he'd done that, and she noticed. "What's the plan?" he said. She showed him the notes. Walked him through the strategy. Which horse to bring out in what order. Which buyers to target and how to approach them. What price to open at and what floor she'd accept. He listened. Really listened, the kind of listening that includes asking questions that show you've actually processed what was just said. "What if Caldwell sent word ahead?" he asked. Clara's jaw tightened. She hadn't let herself think about that. "If he has," she said, "then I have to be better than his interference." "You are," Wyatt said. She looked at him. "You're better than anything he's done to stop you," he said. "You've been better than him this whole trip. You've been better than him for 14 months. "That hasn't been enough to save the ranch yet," she said. "It will be tomorrow." She studied his face. Looked for the platitude in it, the comfortable reassurance that people offered when they didn't know what else to say. It wasn't there. He meant it. Simply, directly, without decoration. "How can you be sure?" she asked. "Because I've watched you work," he said. "And because I've watched those horses. They're extraordinary, Clara. Whatever else whoever tries to interfere, whatever Caldwell's done, those horses are extraordinary, and the right buyers will see it." He paused. "Let them see it. That's all you have to do." She was quiet for a long moment. The town lights were visible in the distance. Tomorrow was enormous and uncertain and everything. "Wyatt," she said. "Yeah. Why are you still here?" He looked at her. A real question deserved a real answer, and they both knew it. "Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks," he said slowly, "this stopped being a job." She held his gaze. Didn't look away. Didn't file it. Didn't name it. Just held it the way you hold something you're not ready to put down and not ready to carry, and somehow have to do both at the same time. "Get some sleep," she said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day yet." He nodded, got up, started walking to the other side of the camp. "Wyatt." Her voice was quiet. He stopped, turned. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." He looked at her for one long moment in the fire's light. This woman who didn't ask for anything, who had just thanked him for something that cost her more than the words suggested. "Wouldn't have missed it," he said. And he meant that too. She didn't sleep. Clara lay on her bedroll with her eyes open and the auction notes spread across her chest and her mind running the numbers over and over, the way you run your tongue over a sore tooth, not because it helps, but because you can't quite stop. 3 horses. 3 chances. 1 day to raise what most men in Red Hollow said she could never raise, to save what most people in Red Hollow said she could never save. She listened to the camp, the horses settling, the fire ticking down, the slow, even breathing from across the camp that told her Wyatt had actually managed to sleep, which she found simultaneously admirable and slightly irritating. At some point before dawn, she gave up on the pretense, folded her notes, and went to check the horses. Duchess first. Always Duchess. The mare turned her head when Clara approached and blew out a soft breath, recognition, comfort, the particular greeting of an animal that knows your footsteps in the dark. Clara put her hand on the mare's neck and stood there for a moment in the pre-dawn quiet, feeling the horse's warmth and steadiness under her palm. "Tomorrow's yours," she told the mare quietly. "You show them what you are, and the rest takes care of itself." Duchess pressed her nose briefly against Clara's shoulder. "Yeah," Clara said. "I know." Behind her she heard Wyatt's boots on the ground. She didn't turn around. "You haven't slept," he said. "I slept enough." "How much is enough?" "Enough to function." He came and stood beside her at the stall. Looked at Duchess the same way Clara looked at her, with the focused attention of someone taking a real inventory rather than a casual glance. "She's ready," he said. "I know she is." "Then what are you doing out here at 4 in the morning?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Making sure I haven't missed anything," she said. Making sure I've thought of everything I need to think of. Making sure. She stopped. Making sure you're not going to fail your father, Wyatt said quietly. The words hit her somewhere she hadn't entirely been expecting. She didn't answer. Because he was right, and they both knew it, and some truths you just let stand without decorating them. Clara. His voice was steady. The same way it was steady when he held a frightened horse or stared down two men who had bad intentions. You're not going to fail him. You haven't failed him once in 14 months. You're not starting today. She turned to look at him. His face in the pre-dawn dark was serious and certain, and completely without the false brightness of someone trying to make her feel better. He wasn't trying to make her feel better. He was telling her what he believed. She turned back to Duchess. "Let's get them ready," she said. The auction grounds were already busy by the time they arrived, and Clara felt it the moment she walked through the gate, that particular atmosphere of men who had money and knew it, moving through a space that was designed entirely around their confidence. Buyers from 3 territories. Ranchers, breeders. A couple of men who had the look of people purchasing on behalf of someone wealthier than themselves. She had been here once before at 16, watching from beside her father. Now she was here with 3 horses and everything on the line. The registration clerk was a young man with ink-stained fingers and a manner that suggested he'd processed hundreds of sellers and developed strong opinions about all of them. He looked at Clara's registration form, looked at her, looked at the form again. "Whitmore Ranch," he said. "Red Hollow." "That's right." "And you're representing the ranch?" "I am the ranch," Clara said. He looked at Wyatt standing slightly behind her. "He's my ranch hand," Clara said before the clerk could form whatever question was building in his expression. "I'm the seller. My name is on the form." The clerk processed this with visible effort. "Right," he said. "Stall assignments are on the board. You're in the eastern section. Bidding starts at 10. They found their stalls and settled the horses, and Clara began the work of preparation, grooming, presentation. The careful attention to every detail that told buyers before the first bid was placed that these animals came from somewhere that cared about quality. She was midway through working on Grant when she felt it. The shift in the air around her. The kind of shift that meant someone was watching and not bothering to hide it. She looked up. 2 men. Both in expensive coats. Both with the practiced ease of men who were accustomed to walking into rooms and having them rearrange around them. The one on the left she didn't recognize. The one on the right she did, or rather she recognized the type so precisely that the specific face almost didn't matter. He had Caldwell's energy. The calm of a man who had never once had to be afraid that he couldn't afford something he wanted. He looked at Duchess, looked at Clara, then looked at the man beside him and said something she couldn't hear, and the man beside him laughed. Clara turned back to Grant and kept working. "Friend of Caldwell's," Wyatt said quietly, appearing beside her. She didn't look up. "You know him. Recognize the brand on his coat pin. Caldwell's cattle operation uses it. That man is Henry Marsh, Caldwell's business partner in 2 counties. A pause. "He's here to make sure nobody buys from you, or to make sure they know they'll regret it if they do." Clara's hands went still for just a fraction of a second. Then they kept moving. "How do you know that?" she asked. A beat of silence. "Because it's what I would do," Wyatt said. "If I were Caldwell, and I had the reach, and I wanted to make absolutely certain." She looked at him then. "You have a history with men like Caldwell," she said. It wasn't a question. Something moved across his face, that shadow under water again. "I'll tell you about it," he said. "After." "After what?" "After you win." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to work on Grant, and her hands were steady, and her jaw was set, and somewhere in her chest, a very specific kind of anger was burning, the clean kind, the useful kind, the kind that didn't distract you, but instead sharpened every edge you had. Caldwell had sent someone here. He had reached 200 miles to interfere with her one chance at survival. Good, she thought. Let him try. The first twist came at 9:15, 45 minutes before bidding opened. An older buyer, thick through the shoulders, gray at the temples, with the hands of a man who had wrangled horses for 30 years, rather than just bought them, stopped at their stall and looked at Duchess with the particular attention of someone who knew what they were seeing. "That's good breeding," he said. "She's the best horse I've ever trained," Clara said. He looked at her. Assessed. The way he'd assessed Duchess directly, without particular flattery or condescension. "You trained her yourself?" "From 18 months. She's 5 now." "And the stone bruise?" Clara's eyes sharpened. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything," he said. "James Whitmore's daughter." The name hit her like cold water. "You knew my father." "Bought a horse from him 12 years ago. Best animal I owned for a decade." He looked at Duchess again. Same bloodline. Her dam's grandmother. He was quiet for a moment, calculating. "Henry Marsh has been working the room this morning," he said, not looking at Clara. "Telling people the horses from your operation are diseased. That you had a herd illness this winter that compromised the stock." Clara's fists tightened at her sides. "That's a lie," she said. "We had a fever come through. 3 horses in the north pasture. These 3 were in a separate facility the entire time. They were never exposed." "Can you prove that?" "I have records." "Then get them out," he said. "Because Marsh is thorough, and he's had 2 hours on you." He finally looked at her directly. "My name is Robert Callahan. I knew your father, and I know a good horse. But sentiment doesn't win an auction. Evidence does." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You'd better move fast, Miss Whitmore." He walked away. Clara turned to Wyatt. "The record book," she said. "Where did we pack it?" "Supply wagon, side pocket on the left." She was already moving. The next 30 minutes were a different kind of battle than any Clara had fought before. Not physical, not emotional exactly, or not in a way she had room to feel yet. Strategic, urgent, precise. She moved through the auction grounds with the records open in her hands, approaching every serious buyer she could identify, not pleading, not arguing, just presenting the documentation of every horse's history, every quarantine record, every health notation she had kept in her meticulous small handwriting since the day the fever first appeared in the herd 8 months ago. Some buyers looked at her with polite skepticism. Some didn't look at her at all. Some listened. Robert Callahan watched from across the grounds, and she could feel him watching, and she didn't look at him, just kept moving, kept talking, kept laying down evidence against a lie that had 2 years of head start on her. Wyatt moved parallel to her through the grounds, working the buyers she couldn't reach, saying what needed saying with the quiet directness of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that truth delivered plainly was more convincing than truth delivered with effort. She caught fragments of his conversations as she passed. "The documentation is complete. You're welcome to verify it yourself. The roan mare is the finest trained horse I've handled in 8 years of this work. Henry Marsh is protecting an investment. I'm telling you what I've seen with my own eyes." He wasn't performing. He wasn't selling. He was just being honest about what he'd watched, about what he knew, and somehow that was more effective than anything Clara could have scripted. At 9:55, 5 minutes before bidding started, she found herself standing at the edge of the grounds with the record book in her hands, and the particular spent feeling of someone who has done everything they can do, and now has to live in the uncertainty of whether it was enough. Wyatt appeared beside her. 8, he said. "I counted 8 buyers who are going to bid fair." "How many did Marsh turn?" 4, maybe 5. He paused. "But the ones he turned were going to lowball you anyway. The ones who are still in, they're the ones with money." Clara stared at the auction ring. "And Callahan?" "Callahan," Wyatt said, "has been watching you move through this crowd for the last 30 minutes with an expression I'd describe as satisfied." She exhaled. "That could mean anything. It means he liked what he saw." The bell rang for the start of bidding. Clara straightened her spine, put the record book under her arm, and walked toward the ring. Grant went first. She'd decided that before they arrived, put the steadiest animal in first, establish that what you're selling is real. Let the crowd calibrate before you bring out the extraordinary. Grant entered the ring, and Clara watched him move, watched the buyers watch him read the room, the way her father had taught her to read it at 16. She could see the interest in the ones who mattered. Could see Marsh standing to one side saying something quietly to the man beside him. The opening bid came in lower than she'd wanted. She kept her face still. The second bid came. The third. The number climbed and she tracked it, and at the moment she calculated was exactly right. Not too early, not too late. Callahan raised his hand and drove the price up with two bids in quick succession that changed the energy in the room. Grant sold for $420. More than she'd expected. She walked out of the ring, and Wyatt was there, and she didn't let herself react yet. Couldn't. Not yet. Not until all three were through. But she registered the number and added it to the running total in her head and kept moving. The gelding sold next. Slightly less $360. A buyer from Wyoming who had examined the records himself and nodded with the particular satisfaction of a man confirming what he'd already decided. Then Duchess. The mare entered the ring and the room changed. It was subtle. The way attention shifts when something extraordinary is present. The murmuring that quieted. The buyers who had been talking to each other who stopped talking. Callahan, who had been leaning against a post, straightened. Clara watched Duchess move. Watched the room watch her, and felt for the first time in 4 days something other than the grinding anxiety of calculated survival. Felt just for a moment the thing she always felt when she watched a horse. She had trained the quiet pride of having built something real from patience and time and belief. Her father would have loved this, she thought. The opening bid came, then the second. Then Marsh's man made a move, a deliberately low counterbid, designed not to win, but to depress the room's sense of what the animal was worth. Clara's jaw tightened. Callahan raised his hand. The number went up. Marsh's man countered. Callahan again. Another buyer entered, the Wyoming man who'd bought the gelding, apparently persuaded by what he'd seen. Then a fourth bidder. The energy in the room had shifted completely now. This wasn't a depressed auction of questionable horses from a woman nobody knew. This was a competition. The number climbed past 600. Past 7. Marsh himself stepped in then. Clara saw the shift in his posture from observer to participant, the decision to spend Caldwell's money to deprive her of hers. He drove the bid to 800. Callahan answered. 850. Marsh. 900. The room had gone very quiet. Clara stood at the edge of the ring and did not move and did not breathe. Callahan looked at Duchess for a long moment, raised his hand. $950, the auctioneer said. Marsh looked at Callahan. Callahan looked back at him with the pleasant expression of a man who had significantly more money than the situation required and was entirely prepared to use it. Marsh looked away. Sold, the auctioneer said. $950 to Robert Callahan. The number hit her like a physical thing. 950, plus 420, plus 360. She was doing the math before the auctioneer finished speaking, adding, subtracting, measuring against the figure she'd carried in her chest for 30 days like a stone. It was enough. Not by much. Not with any comfortable margin. But enough to walk into that bank in Red Hollow and place the payment on the manager's desk and look Edwin Caldwell's interference in the face and say, "You lose." She walked out of the ring on legs that were steadier than she expected. Wyatt was right there. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She looked at him, and he looked back at her. And for a moment, there was nothing between them except the knowledge of what they'd just come through together. 4 days of road. 2 men in the dark. A mountainside that didn't care whether they made it, 30 minutes of racing through a crowd with a record book against a lie, and what was on the other side of all of it. "It's enough," she said. "I know," he said. "We did it." "You did it." She shook her head. "We," she said firmly. He looked at her for a moment, with something in his expression that was different from anything she'd seen there before. Something open, unguarded, the look of a man who had spent years keeping things carefully behind a door, and had just quietly, without quite meaning to, opened it a crack. "Yeah," he said. "We." That should have been the moment. That should have been the breath of relief, the exhale after the long effort, the first step toward something lighter. It wasn't. Because Henry Marsh appeared at her shoulder with two men behind him, and the particular expression of someone who had lost a battle and intended to fight a war. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I need a word." Clara turned to face him. She was exhausted. Her whole body was exhausted. But she turned to face him the same way she'd turned to face every other thing in the last 30 days, the last 14 months, the last 26 years, directly without flinching. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I think you've said enough today. Your auction results are being contested," he said. "I have concerns about the documentation you presented to buyers this morning. Concerns about its accuracy." "Then you're welcome to file a formal complaint with the auction committee," Clara said. "I'll have an answer ready because my documentation is accurate and complete, and I welcome the examination." "Caldwell will come after your ranch directly now," Marsh said. His voice had dropped, losing the pretense of procedural concern. This was something else now. Personal. A message. "He told me to tell you this money won't hold him. He has other means." Clara felt the chill of it. The specific chill of a threat that is not abstract, not hypothetical, but carries the weight of a man who has actually done what he's implying he'll do. She felt Wyatt move just slightly beside her. Not forward. Just present. Solidly, unmistakably present. She kept her eyes on Marsh. "You go back to Caldwell," she said, "and you tell him the Whitmore Ranch paid its debt. You tell him I made this trip, and I did this work, and I did it without a single thing of his. And you tell him—" She held Marsh's gaze without blinking. "That the next time he sends someone to interfere with my business, I will make sure every buyer and every banker in 3 territories knows exactly how he operates." Marsh's eyes narrowed. "That's a dangerous thing to say." "I'm a dangerous woman," Clara said. "Your employer should have thought of that before he started this." The moment held. Then Marsh looked at Wyatt. And Wyatt looked at Marsh with that particular emptiness in his eyes, that absolute lack of fear or aggression that was somehow more unsettling than either, and said nothing. Marsh left. Clara exhaled. Then suddenly, and without warning, her legs were not as steady as she'd thought they were, and she put her hand on the nearest fence post and held on and let the shake come through her. Just for a second. Just the 1 second she allowed herself before she locked it back down. Wyatt's hand came to her elbow. Not grabbing, just there. "You're all right," he said. "I know," she said. "Just give me a second." "Take whatever you need." She stood with her hand on the post and his hand at her elbow and let the last 30 days move through her all at once. The bank manager's desk, the rain before dawn. Pete's guilty face at the barn door. 2 men at the edge of firelight. The mountain passage. Duchess in the ring, with the room going quiet. All of it moving through and past, and then settling. Then she straightened. Took her hand off the post. Didn't pull away from his hand at her elbow. Not yet. "We need to collect the payment and start back," she said. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "The horses need a full day's rest before that journey, and so do you." She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and didn't. "One day," she said. "One day," he agreed. That evening, in the quieter end of the small town, they found a place to eat that wasn't the supply wagon, and Clara ate more than she'd eaten in 4 days, and Wyatt watched her do it with the expression of someone quietly satisfied by exactly this specific thing. "You said you'd tell me," Clara said, setting down her fork. "After. About men like Caldwell. About the history." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the sounds of the room. Other people. Other conversations, other lives going on without crisis. "When I was in Wyoming," Wyatt said. "Before. When I had the family, I worked for a man not unlike Caldwell. Big operation, a lot of reach. When I started seeing things that weren't right, land deals that smelled wrong, workers not being paid what they were owed, I said something." He paused. "I filed a complaint with the Territorial Land Office." "What happened?" "He burned my barn." The words were very quiet, very simple. Clara went very still. "That was before the fever," Wyatt said. "The barn burning. The fever came after, but by that point we'd already lost nearly everything else. He looked at his hands. I've spent 3 years thinking that if I'd just kept my mouth shut, if I'd just let it go, then it would have kept happening to someone else, Clara said. He looked up at her. Yeah, he said. I know that. I do know that. He held her gaze. That's not the same as not carrying it. No, she said quietly. It isn't. They looked at each other across the table in that small room, in that small town, 200 miles from everything that was at stake. And Clara Whitmore had the sudden and complete understanding that she was looking at a man who was not in fact incapable of caring, who was not in fact made for passing through without leaving marks, who was in every way that mattered someone built for exactly the kind of thing he'd been running from. And she was the most terrifying thing about that realization. She didn't say any of it. She picked up her fork. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Thank you for asking, he said. The night of the second day in town, everything changed again. Clara was at the stables later than she needed to be, doing the thing she always did when she was thinking hard about something she hadn't resolved. Working with the horses, her hands finding occupation while her mind turned the thing over. She was working on Duchess when she heard someone behind her. Not Wyatt's step. Too heavy, too deliberate. She turned. Henry Marsh. Alone this time. Without the men behind him, which was somehow worse. Mr. Marsh, she said. Her voice was even. These are private stables. I came to apologize, he said. She stared at him. Caldwell doesn't know I'm here, he said. He looked older than he had that morning. Something had shifted in him between then and now, some internal arrangement. I've worked with him for 11 years. I've done things I'm not proud of. But what I did today... He stopped. Your father was a good man. I knew James Whitmore. Not well, but I knew him. And what Caldwell sent me here to do today is exactly what Caldwell always does, Clara said. Yes. He looked at her steadily. He's going to come at you from another direction, Miss Whitmore. The banknote was one tool. He has others. When you get back to Red Hollow, you need to be ready. What kind of others? The deed to your land. He's been researching a title dispute. Something in the original filing. He has a lawyer looking for any inconsistency he can use to challenge your ownership directly. He paused. I don't know if there's anything there, but I know he's looking. The air in the stable felt very cold. Why are you telling me this? Clara said. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Because I knew your father, he said. And because some things you can't keep living with. He turned and left. Clara stood in the stable with Duchess warm and breathing beside her, and the new information settling over her like snow-silent cold and capable of changing the weight of everything. The banknote was handled. But Caldwell wasn't finished. I was never going to simply be finished. She understood that now with a clarity that went past anger into something colder and more certain. This wasn't going to end with one payment. This was going to require her to build something strong enough that he couldn't dismantle it. To become something he couldn't afford to underestimate anymore. She pressed her hand against Duchess's neck. The mare was steady, warm, real. One thing at a time, Clara told her. Or maybe told herself. She heard Wyatt's boots on the stable floor. He'd followed her. At a distance. She understood now that he'd been doing that, keeping distance enough to give her room close enough to be there if the room ran out. Marsh was here, she said. I saw him leave, Wyatt said. What did he say? She told him. All of it. And as she told him, she watched his face go through something complicated. The particular sequence of a man processing information that makes him want to act, and knowing that the action available to him right now is only to listen. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, deed challenge. Title dispute. That would take time, he said. Legal process. He can't move fast on something like that. Fast enough. Clara. He stepped closer. Not a lot. Just enough that she could see his face clearly in the stable light. You just raised $3,200 in 3 days through 200 miles of mountain terrain after 30 days of crisis. You're not out of this. You're just not done yet. I know that, she said. Do you? Yes. She looked at him. I'm not, I'm not falling apart. I'm thinking. I know. I know you are. He held her gaze. I'm just. He stopped. She waited. I'm just saying you don't have to think alone, he said. The words landed quietly and completely and sat between them like something that had been said before and would need to be said again and didn't require response so much as recognition. She recognized it. We should leave at dawn, she said. I'll have the horses ready, he said. She nodded, turned back to Duchess, and behind her. Wyatt Blackthorne stood for a moment longer than he needed to before he turned and walked back out into the night, and Clara listened to his footsteps recede and thought about what it meant that she already knew that sound. Already knew his walk. Already knew the particular way he moved through a space. Already knew. She pressed both hands against Duchess's neck and held on for a moment to the one thing she had always been certain of. The horses, the work, the tangible real of what she'd built, while everything else rearranged itself around a truth she was not quite ready to name out loud. But she felt it, and it terrified her, and she was going home anyway. The road home was different. Not easier. The terrain didn't change, the miles didn't shorten, and the horses were tired in the deep way that came from hard work, sustained over time. But something in the quality of the journey had shifted. The urgency that had driven them out was still present, but underneath it now was something steadier. Something that felt less like desperation and more like purpose. Clara rode with the payment receipt folded in her inside coat pocket. She had checked it 3 times since leaving town. Not because she doubted it was there, but because there was something she needed in the physical confirmation. The paper between her fingers, real and specific, representing every mile of road and every cold night and every moment she had refused to believe the math was impossible. Wyatt drove the now empty wagon beside her. The horses that had made the journey outbound were gone, sold to men who would work them well. She had satisfied herself of that before the paperwork was signed, and the wagon felt lighter, almost strange in its emptiness. You're quiet, Wyatt said around the 2nd hour. I'm always quiet. You're a different kind of quiet than usual. She looked at him sideways. There are kinds. There's thinking quiet, and there's worrying quiet, he said. And there's the quiet of someone who's turning something over and can't quite find where to set it down. She faced forward again. Marsh's warning, she said. The deed challenge. I've been running the property history in my head. My father filed the original claim in 1861. He was meticulous. I know he was meticulous. I have his records, every one of them. She paused. But meticulous and legally airtight aren't always the same thing in frontier territory. The land office made errors. Clerks made errors. And Caldwell has a lawyer whose whole job is finding those errors. So we get a lawyer too, Wyatt said. She glanced at him. With what money I have enough to pay the banknote. What's left covers operating costs through the fall if nothing goes wrong. A pause. And something always goes wrong. Not always. In my experience, Clara. His voice was patient. The specific patience of someone who has thought about this already and has arrived somewhere. You just raised $3,200 through a strategy everyone said was impossible. You have connections now. Callahan, the Wyoming buyermen, who saw what your horses are and will come back for more. You are not the same position you were 30 days ago. He let that sit for a moment. The title challenge is a problem. It's not the same problem as the one you just solved. Don't carry them as the same weight. She thought about that for a while. You separate things out, she said. How do you do that? Practice, he said. And failure. Mostly failure. What does failure teach you about separating things out? He was quiet for a moment. That when you carry everything at once, you can't move fast enough when one specific thing needs you, he said. So you learn to put things down, not ignore them, just set them in a line. Handle what's in front of you, pick up the next one. She absorbed that. My father did that, she said. He never seemed overwhelmed. I used to think it was because he was stronger than other people. Later I thought maybe he just didn't feel things as hard. She paused. Now I think he just got very good at the line. Smart man, Wyatt said. The smartest person I ever knew, she said, simply, without decoration. The wagon wheels turned, the horses moved, the miles came. They were one day from Red Hollow when the rider found them. He came fast from the direction of town, and Clara had her hand on her rifle before he was close enough to identify. Then she recognized the horse, a paint she knew belonging to her neighbor's hired hand. A boy named Samuel, who was maybe 17, and had the earnest, slightly alarmed expression of someone carrying news he wasn't sure how to deliver. He pulled up in front of them, and his horse danced under him, and he took off his hat. "Miss Whitmore," he said, breathing hard. "Mr. Harlan sent me. Said to find you fast as I could." Thomas Harlan was her nearest neighbor, a decent man 60 years old who had never involved himself in Clara's business and therefore had earned her trust. "What happened?" she said. Samuel's hands tightened on his hat. "Caldwell's men came to your ranch 2 days ago, 3 of them. Said they had a court order from the territorial court about the property." Clara's jaw went rigid. "A court order," she said. "Mr. Harlan read it. He said it's a notice of title dispute, that someone's filed a claim saying the original deed has an error in the boundary survey and the property needs to be re-examined." Samuel swallowed. "They posted it on your gate, and they told your remaining hand that's just old Reuben. Now, miss, they told him that if you don't respond within 10 days of the notice, the court will proceed without you." "When was the notice posted?" Clara said. 4 days ago. 6 days left." She didn't look at Wyatt. She didn't need to. She could feel him beside her, absorbing the same information, running the same calculations. "Is Harlan at his ranch now?" she asked Samuel. "Yes, ma'am." "Ride back and tell him I'll be there before nightfall." Samuel put his hat back on and went. In the silence that followed, Clara stared at the road ahead. "He moved faster than Marsh implied he would," she said. "He already had it prepared," Wyatt said. "The legal challenge was already in motion before Marsh came to warn you. Marsh gave you the information, but it was already too late to prevent the filing." "So Caldwell's strategy was never just the banknote," Clara said. "The banknote was meant to break me financially so I couldn't fight the title dispute." She felt the cold precision of it settle through her. "He was running 2 attacks at once, and he expected you to fail the first one," Wyatt said. "Which I didn't." "Which you didn't." A pause. "So now he's down to 1. She turned to look at him. "One that I have 6 days to answer and no lawyer to answer it with," she said. "I know," he said. "Wyatt, I know," he said again. "Let me think." She hadn't heard him say that before. "Let me think," with that specific quality of a man reaching for something he had stored away and was now deciding whether to use. She watched his face and waited, and the road passed under them, and the horses moved, and she gave him the silence he'd asked for. He broke it after 10 minutes. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you react." Clara looked at him. "Before Wyoming," he said, "before the ranching, I spent 2 years reading law, not in a formal school with a lawyer in Cheyenne who took on apprentices. I didn't finish. Life interrupted." He glanced at her. "But I know enough to read a frontier title dispute. I know enough to draft a response, and know whether there's substance in the claim or whether it's manufactured." The information hit her in layers. The immediate layer relief. Sharp physical relief. The kind that releases muscles you didn't know were clenched. The layer beneath that something sharper. Not anger exactly, but something that needed addressing. "You didn't tell me this," she said. "No. You've been with me for 6 weeks, and you didn't—" "It wasn't relevant until now," he said. "And before you say it, you should have told me," she said. Her voice was even, controlled, the way it got when she was managing something strong. "I don't care if it seemed relevant or not. You should have told me who you were." "You're right," he said. The simple acknowledgement without defense or explanation stopped whatever was building in her chest. I'm not angry," she said after a moment. Which wasn't entirely true, but was the most accurate version available. "I'm just recalibrating," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Who are you, Wyatt Blackthorne, actually?" He met her eyes steadily. "A man who worked law, then lost what mattered, and went back to what his hands knew," he said. A man who's been a ranch hand for 3 years because horses don't ask complicated questions. He paused. And now, apparently, a man who needs to be more useful than that. Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked forward. When we get to Harlan's, she said, I want you to look at the notice. Yes. And if there's a response to be drafted, I'll draft it. We draft it, she said. Together. It's my land. I need to understand every word. Understood, he said. She felt him look at her from the side. Not a long look, just a moment. Clara, he said. Don't, she said. I was going to say I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. She was quiet for a second. I know, she said. I know you are. Tanag. Thomas Harlan was a man who expressed concern through action rather than words, which meant when they arrived at his ranch before nightfall, he had coffee ready and the notice already laid out on his table and a lamp positioned directly over it, so the text was clearly readable. He shook Clara's hand with both of his and said, Glad you're back. And nothing else about the ordeal of the last week, which she appreciated more than she could have expressed. Wyatt read the notice in silence. Clara watched him read it, watched his eyes move his expression, calibrate the specific quality of attention that was different from his usual attention. More technical, more precise. She was seeing a part of him she hadn't seen before, and it struck her how thoroughly people could contain pieces of themselves when life pushed them in a different direction. He finished. Set the document down. It's manufactured, he said. Partially. Partially, Clara repeated. The original survey your father's filing from 1861 does have an inconsistency in the eastern boundary description. It references a creek that shifted course after the winter floods of 1868. The physical boundary has moved, which means the described boundary and the actual boundary don't precisely match. He paused. That part is real. And the rest? The rest is Caldwell's lawyer taking a genuine clerical issue and building a fraudulent claim on top of it. The inconsistency doesn't invalidate the deed. It creates an ambiguity that needs to be resolved, typically through a corrected survey and an amended filing. It does not give Caldwell any claim to the land. His lawyer is arguing it does, but that argument doesn't hold up if you respond correctly. Harlan, who had been listening from across the table, exhaled. So she's not going to lose the ranch. Not on this, Wyatt said. If the response is properly drafted and submitted within the window. He looked at Clara. I need paper and time. Clara looked at Harlan. Harlan was already moving toward the desk in the corner. They worked through the night. Not the frantic, desperate kind of working through the night that Clara had done too many times in the last 14 months, burning through hours on anxiety and adrenaline, and refusing to stop because stopping felt like losing. This was different, focused, purposeful. Wyatt wrote and explained and asked questions, and Clara answered them with the thoroughness of someone who knew her family's land history better than she knew most things in the world. Every boundary marker, every filing date, every note her father had made in the margins of the original documents, which she had kept because she kept everything he'd written, not because she'd known she'd need them, but because they were his. Those margins turned out to be the best thing she had. He noted the creek shift himself, Wyatt said, holding one of her father's documents toward the lamp. Look, 1869. He wrote, Spring melt changed East Creek line approximately 40 feet north, should file amended survey when funds allow. Clara leaned forward. Her father's handwriting, small and careful and exactly as she remembered. He knew, she said. He knew. He just ran out of time or funds to file the correction. Wyatt set the paper down. Which means the amendment was always intended. Which means this isn't negligence or fraud on your father's part. It's an administrative correction that was always pending and has simply been waiting for the right moment to complete. And you can make that argument. I can make that argument in a way the court will understand, he said. Yes. Clara looked at her father's handwriting for a long moment. He had seen the problem. He had noted it. He had intended to fix it, and life had gotten in the way. The way life always gets, in the way of the careful patient, responsible things, and then he had died before he could. But he had written it down. Because he was meticulous. Because he always thought someone might need to know. "Thank you, Papa," she said very quietly. Wyatt heard it, didn't comment, just turned back to the document he was drafting and kept writing. That she thought was exactly right. The response was filed in Red Hollow 4 days later, 2 days inside the deadline. Clara walked it into the land office herself, with Wyatt beside her, and the complete documentation package, the original deed, her father's notes, a certified statement from Wyatt on the legal argument, and a formal request for an amended survey under her arm. The land office clerk read the filing summary with the careful expression of someone who was not going to let their reaction show either way, and stamped it received and gave her the copy. She walked out into the main street of Red Hollow, holding that copy in her hands, and the sun was hitting the street at the particular angle of a late afternoon, and she stood there for a second in it not moving. "It's not over," she said. "The court still has to rule." "The court will rule in your favor," Wyatt said. "The argument is solid. Caldwell's lawyer is going to see the margins note and know they're beaten." "You can't know that." "I know law well enough to know that," he said simply. She looked at him. "What happens when they do rule?" he asked. "When this is finished, when the ranch is clear and the debt is paid, and Caldwell has run out of angles." She understood what he was actually asking. She had understood it for about a week, honestly. Had been carrying the understanding the same way she carried everything filed away for later, when the immediate crisis was resolved and there was room to look at it directly. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Fair enough," he said. They stood in the street for another moment. "I have to go to the bank," she said. "I know. Do you want to come?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I do." The bank manager's name was Gerald Fitch, and he was a man who had spent a professional lifetime cultivating the expression of someone regretfully delivering bad news, which meant that when Clara placed the payment on his desk, exact amount cash from the auction receipt attached, he had no expression ready for what he was seeing. He counted it again. "This is," he started. "The full amount," Clara said. "As required, before the deadline." Fitch looked at the money, looked at Clara, looked at Wyatt standing slightly behind her to the left, looked back at the money. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and then seemed to run out of what came after that. "I'd like a receipt," Clara said, "stamped and dated." He wrote it out. His hands weren't entirely steady. She took the receipt, folded it, and put it in her coat pocket, alongside the one that had been there since the auction. 2 receipts. One for the sale, one for the payment. The whole arc of the last 30 days folded into paper in her inside pocket. She turned to leave. "Miss Whitmore," Fitch said. She stopped. Didn't turn around. "I want you to know," he said, "that the pressure regarding your account, I wasn't entirely in a position to—" "Mr. Fitch," she said, still not turning. "I'm not interested in your explanation. I'm interested in never having this conversation again." She paused. "We won't, will we?" A silence. "No," he said. "I don't believe we will." She walked out. On the street in the afternoon light she breathed, and then something happened that she had not expected and could not entirely control. Her eyes filled just briefly. The way your eyes fill when something you have been holding for a very long time is finally actually done. Not tears exactly, just the body's way of releasing pressure that had been building for 14 months. She blinked it back. Wyatt was beside her, and he saw it, and he said nothing, which was exactly right. "My father would have," she started. "I know," Wyatt said. "He would have been so—" "I know, Clara." She pressed her lips together, nodded. Then from across the street, she heard a voice she had been quietly dreading. Edwin Caldwell. He was standing outside the hotel with 2 men, and he had clearly seen her come out of the bank, and he was walking toward her with the measured pace of a man who had not yet received the full accounting of what had just happened. Clara squared her shoulders. She did not step back. "Miss Whitmore," Caldwell said. He was a big man, not fat, just substantial, the kind of substantial that came from decades of getting what he wanted. "I heard you made quite a journey." "I did," she said. "And the payment's been made." In full. Stamped today. Something moved behind his eyes. Not defeat exactly. Recalculation. The title matter is still pending, he said. I filed the response 4 days ago, Clara said. With complete documentation. You're welcome to have your lawyer read it before he bills you more hours. She held his gaze. You're going to lose that one, Mr. Caldwell. I think your lawyer probably already knows that. Caldwell looked at her. The look of a man deciding how to face something he had not fully planned for. You're a stubborn woman, he said. Yes, Clara said. I am. Your father was stubborn too. Something shifted in her chest. Not grief. Something more complicated. He was, she said quietly. And everything he built is still standing. She looked at Caldwell directly. I want to make you a proposition. He raised an eyebrow. Stop, she said. That's the proposition. Stop. Walk away from the title challenge. Let the court rule on the amended survey, which is all it should ever have been, an administrative correction. And I will not take to every land buyer and banker in 3 territories the full account of how you operate. She paused. I have documentation, Mr. Caldwell, of the bank pressure, of Marcia's activities at the auction. I have a witness who will testify to instructions given. I have not used any of it yet. Another pause. I'd prefer not to. Caldwell was very still. The 2 men with him were very still. The street was doing the thing streets do in small towns when something important is happening quietly, without appearing to filling up with people who happen to need to be somewhere in this direction. You'd make an enemy of me, Caldwell said. I already have an enemy in you, Clara said. I'd rather have an opponent who has decided I'm not worth the trouble. She let that sit for a second. I'm not asking for friendship. I'm asking for a calculation. What I know if it becomes a public costs you more than this ranch ever earned you. You're smart enough to do that math. The silence held. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Wyatt. Wyatt was looking back at him with that particular quality of attention, steady, unafraid, complete, and something in Caldwell's posture shifted. Very slightly. Very specifically. I'll speak to my lawyer, Caldwell said. It wasn't capitulation in words, but it was in everything underneath the words. Clara nodded once. Good day, Mr. Caldwell, she said. She turned and walked away. She didn't look back. Beside her after half a block, Wyatt said very quietly, Where did you learn to do that? My father, she said. He teach you to negotiate like that. He taught me to know what I had before I sat down to talk. She glanced sideways at Wyatt. He said the person who knows what they're holding always has more power than the person who doesn't. Smart man, Wyatt said. I keep telling you, she said. And for the first time in 30 days, in longer than 30 days, maybe in longer than she could exactly track. Clara Whitmore smiled. Not the controlled, careful expression she put on for negotiations, or the steady look she gave men who needed to understand she wouldn't break. A real one. Tired and real and full of something that felt cautiously, and with every qualification, like relief. Wyatt saw it. And something in his face answered it. Not words. Not yet. But an answer. Cha-cha. That evening, back at the ranch, her ranch paid for, documented hers. Clara sat on the porch as the light changed and the horses moved in the pasture, and old Reuben worked quietly near the barn, the way he always did, reliable as weather. She heard the door behind her open and close. Wyatt came and sat beside her, not across from her, not at a working distance. Beside. The same way he'd sat beside her at the table in the town after the auction, and she understood now that this was something he did deliberately. A choice about proximity that meant something specific from a man who had spent 3 years keeping careful distance from everything. They sat in quiet for a while. Callahan sent a letter, she said. Before we left the auction town, I didn't mention it. He wants to talk about a breeding arrangement. His mares are stallion line. That's money, Wyatt said. That's more than money. That's a relationship with a buyer who has reach and reputation. She paused. That's the beginning of something different. Something bigger than surviving. "What does bigger than surviving look like?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "I don't entirely know yet," she said. "I've been in survival mode for so long, I'm not sure I know how to plan for—" She stopped. "For things going well." "You'll figure it out," he said. "We," she said. Not a question, not exactly an invitation, something between the two. He turned to look at her. She looked back. The light was going the particular gold of a Montana evening, and the horses were in the field, and the ranch that her parents had built with their hands, and their belief was whole and paid for, and hers, and she was 26 years old and exhausted in the deepest way, and more certain of who she was than she had ever been. "Wyatt," she said, "you told me you came to town as a stranger and never planned to stay." "I did say that." "Is that still true?" I was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. "No," he said. "It isn't." She nodded, looked out at the horses. "Then stay," she said, simply, without decoration. The way she said the things she meant most. He didn't answer right away. She didn't need him to, because she felt him beside her, solid, real, present, in the particular way of someone who has already decided and is just finding the words to confirm it. And she thought about her father saying, "You see the way you see, don't let anyone take that from you." And she thought she was seeing clearly now, clearly enough to know what was in front of her. "Clara," Wyatt said. "Yeah. I'm not going anywhere." She put her hand flat on the porch rail. The wood was worn smooth, real under her palm. "Good," she said, "and meant it the way you mean the things that have been true for longer than you've been saying them out loud." The evening settled over the Whitmore ranch. The horses grazed. Old Reuben put out the barn lamp. The sky went the colors it goes in Montana when it's deciding between gold and dark, and for a little while the world held exactly still. And Clara Whitmore sat beside the man who had stood when others walked away, and breathed all the way out, and let herself, just for this moment, be something other than someone fighting. She let herself be someone who had won. The territorial court ruled 6 weeks later. Clara was in the barn when Wyatt came in with the envelope, and she knew from the way he was walking, not fast, not slow, just deliberate, the walk of a man who has read something and is giving himself the seconds between reading and delivering to make sure his face is ready, that it was the court's decision. She set down what she was doing. He held out the envelope. She opened it herself, read it herself, the way she did everything directly, without handing it to someone else to interpret first. The court found in her favor. The amended survey was accepted. The title dispute was dismissed. The Whitmore Ranch deed, corrected to reflect the creek's current course, was confirmed as legally sound and wholly belonging to Clara James Whitmore. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it against her chest for a moment, with her eyes closed, and in the quiet of the barn, with the horses breathing around her, she said in a voice too low for anyone but herself, and whatever remained of her father in the walls of the place he'd built, "There it is, Papa. There it is." She heard Wyatt move, felt him close, not touching, just near the way he was near, always calibrated exactly right, close enough to be real, far enough to give her what she needed. "It's done," she said, opening her eyes. "It's done," he said. She looked at him. "Caldwell dropped the challenge 2 weeks ago," she said. "The court ruling just makes it official." "Sometimes official is what you need," he said. She nodded, looked around the barn, her horses, the rebuilt fence posts visible through the open door, the water trough. Wyatt had repaired in the first week and reinforced twice since. The rack of equipment she had organized and reorganized over 14 months of making do with less than she needed. All of it, hers, clear and legal and permanent. "What do you want to do today?" Wyatt asked. It was such a simple question. Such a mundane, ordinary question, the kind that belonged to regular life rather than crisis. It caught her slightly off guard, the way normal things catch you off guard when you've been in survival mode long enough that normality feels like a foreign language. "I want to write to Callahan," she said, "about the breeding arrangement. I've been putting it off because there was always something more urgent, and I can't do that anymore. The urgent things are handled. It's time to start building." "All right," he said. And I want to start looking at the north pasture for expansion. If the breeding arrangement goes through, we're going to need more space than we have. I've been thinking the same thing, he said. The north pasture boundary would take about 3 weeks of fencing to extend properly. She looked at him. You've been thinking about it. For a while, he said. Didn't seem right to bring it up when we were still fighting to keep what we had. Something about that. The patience of it. The restraint of a man who had been thinking 3 steps ahead and had waited until she was ready to hear it, settled through her with a warmth she didn't try to analyze or contain. Tell me what you've been thinking, she said. He did. For the next hour, they sat in the barn with a rough map between them and talked about the ranch, not as something to save, but as something to grow. And Clara felt the difference in her bones. The shift from the defensive crouch of survival into the upright stance of someone building. It felt unfamiliar. It felt, she thought, like something she might get used to. The letter to Callahan went out that afternoon. His response came back in 9 days faster than she'd expected, which told her he'd been waiting. The terms he proposed were generous. Genuinely generous, not the hollow generosity of someone setting up a negotiation position, but the terms of a man who respected what he was dealing with and wanted the arrangement to work. She read the letter at the desk, her father's desk, and thought about the 16-year-old who had stood beside James Whitmore at the Billings auction, watching the buyers move, learning to read a room. Thought about what her father would have said if she'd described this moment to him. She knew exactly what he would have said. He would have said, "I knew it. I always knew it." She wrote back to Callahan that same day and accepted. When she told Wyatt, he looked at the letter and then at her and said, "You negotiated 2 of the terms." 3, she said. "He'll agree to all of them." "How do you know?" "Because he needs the arrangement as much as we do, and he's smart enough to know that the person across the table from him knows that." She looked up from the desk. "My father taught me that." Wyatt studied her for a moment. "Robert Callahan is one of the most successful horse breeders in 3 territories, he said. "And you just told me he needs this arrangement as much as you do with complete confidence. Is that wrong?" "No," he said, and smiled. "A real one, the full version, the one that he didn't deploy often enough. It's just you have no idea, do you?" "No idea of what?" "How far you're going to go," he said. Not flattery, not performance. Just a man stating something he had arrived at through observation and was now saying because it was true. "You have genuinely no idea." Clara held his gaze. I know where I want to go," she said. "Where? Far enough that my children look back at this desk and this ranch and understand what's worth fighting for." She paused. "Far enough that nobody in Red Hollow or anywhere else ever again tells a woman what she can't do with the land she inherited and the horses she trained and the mind she was born with." The words landed in the room. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "Your children," he said carefully. She looked at him steadily. "That's what I said," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something working through him that she could see but not fully read, not the shadow underwater. This time something clearer. Something arriving. "Clara," he said. "Don't make it complicated," she said. "I'm not very good at complicated." "You're extraordinarily good at complicated. You've been managing complicated for 14 months. That's different. That's logistics." She looked at him directly. "This is simple. You're here. You stayed. You said you weren't going anywhere." She paused. "I believe you." He was very still. "I meant it," he said. "I know you did." Another pause. "So did I, when I said stay." The thing between them that had been building since a barn at dawn on a cold morning in Red Hollow, since a fire in the mountains and 2 men in the dark, and an auction ring in a town 200 miles north, since every conversation they'd had where neither of them quite said the thing they meant, and both of them heard it anyway, that thing finished building. Just like that. Quietly. Without ceremony. "I lost people," Wyatt said. "I know what it costs. And I spent 3 years telling myself I wasn't going to." "I know," Clara said. "But you're not." He stopped. Started again. "You're not something I can walk away from, Clara. I think I knew that inside the first week. I've just been running, she said. He looked at her. We've both been running, she said. In different directions from different things, and we ended up in the same barn at dawn. She let that sit. I think that means something. Yeah, he said. His voice was quiet. I think it does too. She stood up from the desk. Good, she said. Now help me with the North Pasture survey because I want to have measurements before Callahan's first visit, and we're already 2 weeks behind where I want to be. He laughed. She hadn't heard him laugh before. Not like that, not the full version unguarded. It was a good sound. It changed his face into something younger and lighter, and she thought, there it is. There's the person underneath all that careful management. There's who he is when he's not carrying everything alone. She knew that person. She was starting to know that person, the way you know the horses you've worked long enough not by studying them, but by being with them until their presence is as familiar as your own breathing. She picked up the survey notes. Well, she said. He got his hat. The first winter after the auction was harder than the one before it, but different. They lost 2 horses in January, a colt who hadn't built enough strength before the cold came, and an older mare who had been declining through the fall. Clara felt both losses. The way you feel losses when you have invested time and care and belief, which is to say, she felt them fully and let herself feel them, and then kept working because that was the contract with this life. But January also brought the first foals from the Callahan breeding arrangement. 3 of them. Healthy, strong, with the lines that Clara had been working toward for years, showing up now in these new animals in a way that made Robert Callahan ride out personally to see them and stand at the fence with his hat in his hands, saying nothing for a long time. Your father's bloodline, he finally said. And 2 generations of careful selection, Clara said. His and mine. Callahan nodded slowly. These animals are going to be worth more than anything I've seen come out of Montana in a decade, he said. I know, Clara said. He looked at her sideways, amused and respectful in equal measure. You're not humble about it, he observed. I spent a long time being told I was wrong about what I knew, she said. I stopped being humble about the things I've earned the right to be certain of. Callahan laughed, the laugh of a man genuinely delighted. Fair enough, Miss Whitmore, he said. Fair enough. She looked at the foals in the pasture, then she looked at the ranch around her, the rebuilt fences, the expanded north pasture newly fenced, ready for the coming year's growth. The barn Wyatt had reinforced through October. The house where her father's desk still sat in the same place it always had, but where 2 coffee cups now lived on the same shelf by habit. It's Mrs. Blackthorne now, she said. As of last October. Callahan looked at her, then passed her toward where Wyatt was working with one of the new ranch hands they'd taken on in November. I didn't know, he said. Small ceremony, she said. Just us and Harlan and his wife. Callahan was quiet for a moment. Your father would have approved of him, he said. Clara felt the words go through her clean and warm, the way the best truths do. I know, she said. That mattered to me. The twist that came that spring was not a crisis. That was the thing nobody tells you about life after survival, that the unexpected can go the other way. That you can be standing in a barn, checking on a mare, and have Wyatt come in from the direction of town, with a letter in his hand, and a look on his face, that is not the look of bad news at all, and it can stop you as completely as any crisis ever had. Territorial Agricultural Board, he said, holding out the letter. They're establishing a new registry for Montana horse breeders. Documentation of bloodlines, training methods, health records. He paused. They've asked you to sit on the founding committee. Clara stared at him. They've asked you, specifically. Callahan recommended you, and apparently 3 other buyers from the auction. He watched her face. Clara, they want your name on the founding document of the Montana Horse Registry. She took the letter, read it. Read it again. This is, she started. Yeah, he said. Wyatt, my name, on a founding document. Your name, he said. On a founding document. She looked up at him. My father, she started. Stopped. Would not be surprised, Wyatt said firmly. Not even slightly, He would say, of course. He would say, I always knew it. He would probably say something about how it took everyone else long enough to catch up. Clara pressed her lips together, nodded. Once. Hard. Write back and tell them yes, she said. You should write it yourself, Wyatt said. Why? Because your name goes on the founding document, he said. And your handwriting should be the one that says yes. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had laid money on a merchant's counter for a woman he didn't know yet, who had driven a wagon through a mountain pass in the dark without flinching, who had pulled 2 years of legal knowledge out of a past he'd mostly set aside because it was what the moment required, who had stayed when staying meant choosing something permanent over the safety of passing through. At the man who was right now standing in her barn with a letter that changed her future in his hands, making sure she was the one who answered it. You're a good man, she said. It was inadequate. It was also exactly true. You're a remarkable woman, he said. And I'd appreciate it if you'd finish writing that letter before the spring foals need attention, because I'm going to need your hands in about an hour. She laughed, went to the desk, wrote the letter in her own small, careful handwriting. Her father's handwriting, she always thought in her hand. Yes, she would serve, with honor. The town of Red Hollow changed slowly. The way towns change, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the accumulation of realities that become impossible to argue with. Margaret Prewitt, who had once told Clara that people would talk about her hiring a strange man, came to Clara in the summer of that second year, asking advice about her granddaughter's horse, which had developed a hoof problem the local farrier couldn't resolve. Clara told her what to do. It worked. Margaret told her friends. Tom Harrison extended credit to the Whitmore Blackthorn Ranch without being asked, without conditions, and without once suggesting that a man should be the one signing the paperwork. Pete Dawson, who had quit before the auction journey and spent 8 months working for a ranching operation that treated him adequately, and no more showed up at the gate one morning asking if there was work. Clara hired him back. He was better than he'd been before, which she had expected. People usually were once they'd made a choice that cost them something, and then had to live with the cost. Edwin Caldwell left Red Hollow in the fall of that year. Not dramatically, no confrontation, no final scene. He simply moved his operation to a territory further west, where presumably the obstacles were more manageable. His hotel was bought by a family from Ohio who painted it blue and served good food, and didn't care what anyone thought about that. Clara noticed his absence. The way you notice when something that was always slightly wrong about a room finally gets fixed. Not relief so much as rightness. Like the world correcting an error it had been carrying too long. The evening that Clara thought about for years afterward, the one she would someday try to describe to her children and find that the words were never quite enough, happened in the late summer of that second year, when everything that had been uncertain was now settled, and everything that had been fought for was now real. She and Wyatt were on the porch. The children they would eventually have were not yet there. But the life that would hold them was the repaired barn, the expanded pasture, the house with 2 coffee cups on the same shelf, the desk where her father's handwriting lived in the margins of documents that had saved the place he'd built. Their oldest ranch hand. Old Reuben had gone home for the evening. The summer dark was coming in slow, the way it does in Montana, generous with its light, and the horses were moving in the field with the unhurried ease of animals that were well and cared for and knew it. Wyatt reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, not as a gesture. Just took it the way you take something that belongs in your hand. She let him. They sat. They said you were too wild to love, he said after a while. The same words someone had said on a Red Hollow street 2 years ago, when he was still a stranger, and she was still in the eyes of the town, a problem to be solved. Clara looked out at the pasture. And you said, she asked. The same question she had asked then the first time when he was still new enough to be surprising. He squeezed her hand. Perfect, he said. Because I was too wild to fit anywhere else. She turned to look at him. At the face she now knew as well as the horses and the land and her own hands, the weathered lines of it. The steadiness behind the eyes, the way it looked when something moved him, that he was pretending not to show. to show the way it looked right now in the last of the summer light looking back at her. "We're a pair," she said. "We are," he said. "A pretty good one, I think." "Better than pretty good," she said. He smiled. She turned back to the field and held his hand and breathed the Montana evening and thought about her father on her shoulders saying, "You see the way you see. Don't ever let anyone take that from you," and thought that she hadn't. That she had held it through every winter and every bank notice and every man who had looked at her and seen a problem and had come through to this porch this evening, this hand in hers, this life that was wholly and completely and permanently her own. Some people spend their whole lives being told that the things that make them different are the things that make them wrong. They are told to be quieter, smaller, more manageable, more convenient for the people around them who can't see past their own comfort. Clara Whitmore had refused. And refusal, it turned out, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of it. The Whitmore Blackthorn Ranch stood for generations. The horses they bred and trained became the standard by which other Montana breeders measured their own work. The name on the registry. Clara's name in her small, careful handwriting appeared at the top of documents that shaped the territory's future. And long after the people of Red Hollow had stopped calling her wild, long after the whispering had turned to admiration, and the admiration had turned to something quieter and more lasting. The kind of respect that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone simply knows. Clara Whitmore Blackthorn sat on the same porch, in the same chair, with the same hand in hers, and watched her children ride horses across the field their grandfather had believed in before anyone else did. She had not needed someone to complete her. She had never been incomplete. She had needed someone who could see what she already was, the full, undiminished, uncompromising truth of her, and choose to stand beside it. Wyatt Blackthorn had done that, and she had done the same for him. Two people who refused to be smaller than they were, who found each other in a barn at dawn, and a merchant's counter, and a mountain pass in the dark, who built something real from the materials of stubbornness and courage, and the particular grace of being seen by the right person at the right moment. That was the whole story. And it was from the first word to the last entirely true.